Hello, I'm Elise, and I hope you're all doing so good today. Today, I'm excited because I'm finally starting my publisher series, which I've been looking forward to start. And we are going to be focusing on Catapult today. So with this publisher series, my aim is to mostly focus on indie presses. I will also be covering some imprints of larger publishers, but I want to do the majority indie presses. And I'll basically be going over a little bit of general info about the publisher as a whole, and then I'll be going over maybe potentially some popular books that they've had that you might have heard of, some books that I'm excited to read by them, and then I'm also going to always read at least 3 books from that publisher. One will always be a new release, and then the other 2 plus can be anything, but I'll always at least include 1 new release on there in order to review. So let's go ahead and dive in and see what Catapult has to offer. So Catapult Books is the larger group, and Catapult Books has 3 imprints. There's Catapult, there's Counterpoint Press, and then there's Soft Skull. And this one is just going to be focusing on Catapult. And Catapult is located in New York, so it's in the US. And they mainly focus on literary fiction. They do also publish nonfiction. They call it artful narrative nonfiction, which I do really love narrative nonfiction if I'm going to read it. Artful narrative nonfiction, who knows? But that's what they call it. So mainly lit fic, but also some nonfiction. I will say the nonfiction that they do publish, they have a whole series that is on writing specifically. And I actually have one of those books. So I have Body Work by Melissa Febos, and the subheading for this is The Radical Power of Personal Narrative. And they have a whole collection of books on writing. This is just one of them that I also happen to have. I'm not going to be reading this for this video. But if you're interested in books on writing, they do have a collection of those. So I thought that was interesting about them as well. So now I'm going to go over a couple of books that I think are more popular by this publisher that you might have heard of. So one of them is the Manning Tree Witches, which is a popular one. Heartbroke by Chelsea Baker, Fake Accounts by Lauren Euler, and Sankofa by Chibundi Anuzo. And those are just some of the ones that maybe you might have heard of. I'll put all those covers on the screen. Some ones that I'm very intrigued to read by them include Wanting. So it's women writing about desire, and this is a collection that's edited by Margot Kahn and Kelly McMasters. I'm very intrigued by this. This is one of my most anticipated nonfiction releases of the year. I can't wait for this to come out. So very excited about that. I'm also intrigued by Brutes by Diz Tate, that's coming out by them. And then Brother and Sister Enter the Forest by Richard Mirabella. So those are just some of the ones that I'm interested in that are coming out by them. And then now I'll go ahead and go over the books that I'll be reading for the video. So the first book I'm going to be reading for this video, I've actually already started, and that is Portrait of an Unknown Lady by Maria Gainza. And this is translated from the Spanish by Thomas Bunstead. And this novel is a new release, so this is going to be one of the new releases. There's going to be 2 in this video. And this novel follows both an art forger and an art critic. And the art forger is like a renowned art forger in Argentina. They're known for forging a specific painter, what's her name? Mariette Littis, I think is how you pronounce it. But they do other forgeries as well, but they're supposed to be like chef's kiss, pristine forgeries. And this art critic is becoming increasingly obsessed with finding out who the forger is. And there's complicated reasons for why they want to find out who the forger is. That may not be all what they appear. So this one is definitely like intriguing, but it is literary fiction, so it's not like suspenseful, I wouldn't say. At least that's not the tone I'm getting thus far, but I'm very intrigued to finish this one. I'm about 1/3 of the way through. So excited to see what this one's all about. The second book I'll be reading for this video is Dead Souls by Sam Riviere. And this one is about a poet. I believe it's a poet. Is that right? Yeah, a poet who's been accused of plagiarism. So they're kind of having a bit of a scandal moment, and they meet a journalist at a bar who wants to tell their story, and they agree that they'll tell them their story if they can go home with them, have a place to stay, and food to eat. So this journalist is slowly uncovering the story of this poet, and I think there's like lots of scandalous stuff happening throughout this, more than just the plagiarism, but it's also talking about like cancel culture. It's talking about like what even is plagiarism and whether or not there's merit in some forms of plagiarism. I'm very intrigued for this one, and this is also a new release if I didn't say that already. And these two I do think will be in conversation with each other, so I'm curious to see what I'll think about reading them both in a short amount of time. The last book that I'll be reading is a backlist book, and that is Celestial Bodies. And this is by Johka Alharthi, and this is translated from the Arabic, let me see by who, by Marilyn. I wish they would put the translator on the cover, but we move. So this book actually won the Booker International Prize, I believe in 2018. Do not quote me on that though. Oh no, 2019. It won in 2019. Yes, okay. And this one follows 3 sisters living in Oman, and all of them have, it seems like, very different paths. So one is kind of refusing to marry, one is awaiting a long lost love that they're trying to reunite with, and then one is married and trying to process through maybe potentially a previous heartbreak. So very intrigued to read this and read about women in Oman. I think there's going to be some stuff involving the transition from like slavery in Oman to a free like country in Oman, and what that transition looks like throughout each of the POVs. So I'm very curious to read this, and I mean, you know, I'm going to say it must be good because it won a prize. Who knows if that means it will be for me, but I have high hopes for this one. So those are the 3 books that I'm going to be reading, and really my hope with this is to figure out if there are certain publishers that I really get along with and that have a good style for me and a good selection for me. I feel like, you know, people say if you're trying to find new wines, find a good importer, because if you have the same taste as the importer, typically the wines that they come out with will be to your taste. And I'm hoping the same applies for publishers. I'm hoping if I can find some publishers that I really have the same taste to, that I'll be able to repeatedly buy from them and have like better odds of enjoying what I buy. So that's the hope. We're gonna go on this journey together. So I will check back in with you when I've read the first book. Bye. All right, I have finished the first book, and that is Portrait of an Unknown Lady by Gainza, translated from the Spanish by Thomas Bunstead. And this book didn't totally work for me. This book is, like I said previously, about an art critic, but I think the synopsis is misleading in certain regards. So this story in the beginning, the first section, follows an art curator and her apprentice, and we're getting the narrative from the point of view of the apprentice. And the apprentice is kind of enamored with this art curator. Her name is Enriqueta, and she kind of finds purpose in being Enriqueta's assistant. She has very much up until this point been lost, hasn't really known what she wanted to do, hasn't felt like she has purpose, and now she finds this woman who embodies everything that she would like to embody. So that's the first section of the book. Then pretty early on, this isn't a spoiler, this is early on, Enriqueta dies, and then the story kind of moves into our main character. I'm gonna say we don't know her name, but who knows. And she then starts investigating this woman who is called Renee, and she was like a famous forger back in the day and would do really spectacular forgeries of Mariette Lidis. And her previous mentor, Enriqueta, was involved in that forgery scheme and always spoke very highly of her. So really, most of the book is following that journey. And in the blurb, it says that our main character, our POV, is like obsessed with finding out who this forger is. And that, I think, is one of the misleading parts. Obsessed to me implies like slightly unhinged and maybe dark. And that is not this at all. It really is just like she's sort of casually investigating, trying to figure out more about Renee. And so that wasn't exactly the tone I was thinking it was gonna be going into it. The thing that I liked about this book is sort of revolving around the question of what does it mean to have authenticity in art? And that is the big thing that this is questioning. And I appreciated that question, and I appreciated some of the ways in which the author is challenging that question. They do this a lot through the form of the novel. So there are two sections of this novel that take a different form than the traditional narrative style. One section is in the form of like curation descriptions about art that they're showing at a gallery. So it's just, item, description about the item, item, description about the item. And that goes on for a whole section, and there's nothing else in there. Then another section takes place in the form of a court transcript that the narrator is looking through to try and find out the identity of Renee. And so it's just, like witness statement. Then there's statements from the lawyers and a statement from the judge. So like in form, it's really interesting that those are getting put in here, because in a way, those are kind of like copies. So she's putting in a copy of the transcript in her own book, and she's putting in these, item curated reviews in the book. And I think that's one way where she's kind of challenging, I'm putting in quotes and whole transcripts in here, and is that, authentic in this novel? And then another thing she's doing is putting in lots of quotes. So there's so many things quoted in here, lots of like great Spanish or French literature is getting quoted. There's lots of quotes from artists, and all of those are again questioning, like, I'm directly quoting people. Does that somehow inform whether or not this book is my own? And then lastly in this, the narrator, who is trying to write a biography on Renee, is interviewing all these people that may or may not have connections with her, and are sort of recounting their memories of Renee to the narrator. And in this way, not only do we get to see the fallacies of memory and how memory in and of itself is in some ways a retelling that who can tell how accurate that is, and is that not misrepresenting someone's life if someone remembers them slightly differently or through their own lens. So there's that aspect to the interviews. And then again, with the interviews, she's putting the interviews in this book. And again, we question, well, okay, she's writing a book about someone else's life. What right does she have to write about someone's life? And in what ways might that itself be considered inauthentic, or, plagiarism, or not her own original ideas? And yet that seems to be a way that is widely accepted, that we would write biographies about people. Whereas kind of plagiarism in art, or forgeries in art, sometimes work might be just as good as the original artist, but it's still considered a forgery. And where do we draw the line in seeing merit in work and having something be original? That was what I appreciated about this book. Other than that, I think the execution failed for me a bit. So the sections in which it was playing with form did not work for me. They were so hard to get through. It was like a slog getting through all of that. It was not engaging to read. And I really think that those sections, you could have put in, 2 or 3, either like witness statements from the transcript or like blurbs trying to sell the art. And the same point could have been made instead of needing to put like 20. And for us just to have to continuously read through that. I really think those could have been shortened, and we didn't need them all. And then overall, the blurb just didn't match what I was getting into, and it just overall wasn't engaging. Like, it was hard for me to get through. Not a lot was happening, like plot, who is she? This book, don't know her. And it just overall didn't work. It fell flat for me. So I did give this 3 stars because I appreciated what the author was trying to do in regards to the question of, what is authenticity in art? But other than that, I felt like it fell a little flat for me. So that is Portrait of an Unknown Lady. Next, we're gonna check out Dead Souls and see if that one works better for me. So I will check back in once I've read that one. All right, we are back, and I finished the next book, and that is Celestial Bodies by Johka Alharthi. And this one, the writing was really well done. So I think my favorite thing about this book was the writing. Well, maybe I should tell you what it's about before I get too far ahead of myself. So I know I said a blurb in the beginning, but for me what this book is all about the differences in like ideas, beliefs, values throughout generations. And particularly this one is following like generations of a family in Oman, and the changes that are not only happening throughout the country at that time, but how those manifest themselves in each generation, and how there might be a change in the law, but it may take many generations for that to actually play out in the equality and like equity of the population. So this kind of follows a family of a huge cast of characters that are all related in some way, and kind of just their introspections, and you're learning about the differences between all the members of the family. So again, the writing is stunning. I loved the writing. I loved that introspective aspect of it. You really felt like you were genuinely in the head of real characters, which I very much appreciated. I like stories that feel very like real slice of life type of stories. And so I appreciated that about these characters. I also loved the through line of all the shame, disappointment, disillusionment that can happen with the expectations that one generation has of another, going both ways, and how that can really like dampen the progress, so to speak, of a culture or of a people. And I loved that about the story as well. For me, the main like characters. This really is about like so many characters. There's a huge character map in the beginning. So this is all the characters that we are getting information from. And for me, it's really about Abdullah and Maya, who are a married couple, and then Abdullah's father and their daughter London. There are so many more characters in that. They have more kids, like they have obviously more parents, but those are the 4 characters in which in whom I could see the narrative the best, kind of that like narrative through line of the changes in generations the best. Those are like my main characters. I could follow those storylines really well. The rest of the storylines, I lost the plot a little bit, you know. I couldn't always tell with all of the characters how they were fitting into the overarching narrative that the story was trying to say. And it did get a little bit confusing for me. Now, I am gonna own up on my part of this. So originally when I started this book, I started it on a flight and I didn't have my physical copy with me, so I was listening to the audiobook. That was a my bad moment. If you're gonna listen to the audiobook, which the audiobook is done well, you absolutely need the character map. It is like non-negotiable. You need the character map to know how people are related to one another. And like the names, fine. I could keep all the names separate, but I could not keep track of who was who in the family tree, and like how they were like fit into one another's lives. So you must have the character map. So either read it physically with the character map or like have that like saved as a picture or something that you can refer back to. So that one was a my bad, and that probably led to some of my confusion. But I do feel like overall there were some side characters that you only hear from like once or twice that I'm like, I don't know how necessary I felt those were, and did kind of find them confusing. But yeah, still enjoyed this story, enjoyed hearing about the perspectives that I really did feel connected to, and enjoyed the themes of, you know, just following generations and all this, like these big feelings that come up when things don't meet your expectations, and the aftermath and fallout of that, and how, you know, kind of like butterfly effect, like how each decision can have like a wide effect for generations to come. So very much appreciated this novel. I do think the blurb is a little also misrepresenting of what the story is about. The blurb says that it follows 3 sisters, and Maya is one of the sisters. The other 2 sisters, yes, there are storylines that follow them. They are secondary, in my opinion, to that like main family storyline that I spoke about earlier. This also in the blurb talks about how like it's following Oman in a transitional phase of like being able to own slaves and that becoming illegal, and that is in this book as well. Again, I think that fell a little bit secondary to just the introspection and from like family member to family member, but that is in here. And I did appreciate, and again I see this with like Abdullah, his father, and his daughter London, the best of the change in that sentiment over time. So yeah, I would say overall I really enjoyed this. I loved the writing. I would definitely pick up something else by this author, but word to the wise, the character map is not optional in my opinion, and I do feel like the blurb was a little bit misrepresenting what is actually going on here, but overall still recommend if you're interested in this book. All right, so I will check back in with you when I have read the last book, and then we'll wrap it all up from there. Bye. Hello, we are back with the last book that I'm reading for Catapult, and that is Dead Souls, and this is by Sam Riviere. And so I'm gonna say just right off the bat, this was a no for me. This did not work for me, and I'll tell you why. But first, I'll give you a little bit of recap of what the book is about. So this book follows an unnamed narrator who works for a literary magazine and basically like critiques literary works. And this does take place in a like kind of semi-dystopian future, but basically this unnamed narrator stumbles into this kind of literary party at a bar, and there he meets Solomon Weiss, who has recently had a fall from grace in the literary world, because he's been found to have like plagiarized essentially a lot of his work. So this happens because in this future, in order to keep people from plagiarizing and sort of having original work, they come up with this software that runs any work through it before it gets published and says if there's like any redundant like themes, quotes, thoughts, anything like that, and it will give you like a redundancy score. And if you don't score at least like a 96%, I think it is, you can't be published. So this poet basically submits something and it comes out and doesn't meet the required score. So he kind of has a fall from grace, and then later on re-enters the literary world doing spoken word-esque type stuff. And then when people eventually start running the spoken word through the same type of test, that comes out to be like almost 100% redundant. So this is kind of exploring what it means to have original thought in our society, and whether or not that's even really possible. This also explores a lot about like PC culture and what it means to be politically correct in an age where a lot of things that you say are going to be recorded. So those are all interesting themes. The format of this book is pretty experimental. So if I open it up, every page looks like this. So no line breaks or anything like that. And most sentences will go over a page. So they're very, very long run-on sentences. And that is like the entire thing. Now that can work for me sometimes. It didn't totally work for me here. I think that this is gonna sound weird, but this is just so, I don't know, stereotypically like male in the literary world, like very stereotypical masculine vibes talking about literature, if that makes sense. Like it's just very clearly written by a man, and like the narrator's point of view is like so, I don't know, privileged in a sense. So I didn't like that about it. I also think that the format didn't totally work for me. I get that it was trying to be experimental and almost mimic poetry in a sense, and I think this is even classified as like poetry in some regards. It's fiction, but it was classified as like poetic style, and I get that that ties along with the story, but ultimately I think it just felt like too much. I think this could have been a really well done novella in like 100 pages or less, but this book is like 300 pages and it was so redundant, and I have no doubt that that's intentional, but it just didn't have the payoff that I think it needed to have in order to endure that for 300 pages. Like enduring just this melange of thoughts about the publishing industry, which some of which were interesting, but it's like one sentence of that was interesting, not 100 pages of that was interesting. And like it could have been summed up way shorter in my opinion. The other like formatting difference about this is that there's no chapter breaks either, and in the table of contents for this book it's just separated by names. So as a new name is introduced in the story, or like that character shows up in the story, that's the table of contents. There's no page break indicating that, but that's what the table of contents shows. And even like all the people that show up, some of them I was like, I don't understand how that helps explain the overall narrative more, and like I don't think needed to be in there. So this wasn't a win for me. I am going to end up unhauling this, unfortunately. I do love the cover, so that is very sad. But I think this experiment as a whole has been a success. I think what I've discovered with just reading 3 Catapult books, right? So there's so many other books out there from Catapult, and I'm still very interested in the ones that I talked about earlier, particularly Wanting. That is still like my #1 nonfiction that I want to read this year. So I have learned though that Catapult tends to have books that kind of experiment with form, at least in the ones that I have read here. So in the first one, Portrait of an Unknown Lady, there are 2 sections of that book that have a totally different form. One is in art descriptions, and then the other one is in interviews, and that was very intriguing and played into the overall novel. In Celestial Bodies, it was basically set up as like different POVs, many different POVs, and some of the POVs were from like the moon goddess and stuff like that. And then this one, obviously, it was like all no page breaks, no line breaks, really long run-on sentences. So definitely playing with form, and I like that. I like that experimental style. And they all really are like addressing some central questions. So Portrait of an Unknown Lady was exploring, you know, what does it mean to have authenticity in art? And this one, those 2 are really in conversation with each other, because this one is talking about like what does it mean to have original thought in literature. So very much in conversation there, and I like a piece of work that explores a question and makes you think about a philosophical current question in our culture. So I very much appreciate that. And even Celestial Bodies really explored kind of the pattern of generations, and even if a law changes, how long does it take for us to actually see that in effect in our society? So all very interesting. They had a good through line, had good themes. So overall, I do think Catapult is a publisher I will check out again. Like I said, I already have Body Work by them, which is a nonfiction on writing, so I will be checking that out as well. But yeah, I think overall I like a publisher that does translated works, so I really appreciate that about them. And yeah, if you're interested in any of the books that I talked about here today, or just interested in some of the stuff I talked about for the publisher in general, I highly encourage you to pick them up. I know I'll be checking more stuff out by them, and now I feel like I have a little bit better idea of the books that I should be choosing for them and which ones might work for me. So I hope you enjoyed this series, the series opener. And if there are other indie publishers that you want me to check out, please let me know in the comments down below. I'm very much interested in finding more that I don't know about and reading from new indie publishers. So let me know your favorites down below, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!